Good evening, everybody. How are you doing tonight? First of all, welcome. Thank you for coming out in 105-degree heat. You're braver than most. I think we'll probably see quite a few online here. Today, we are very lucky. Maybe Sarah doesn't feel this way because she's not accustomed to this sort of temperature. But we're really lucky to have New York Times bestselling author, Sunday Times bestselling author of well over 20 books, and she has scared us and delighted us over the many years with her writing. We're really lucky to have, after 7 years, the author Sarah Pinborough, and we've got our great friend Raina, right? Baria, sorry about that, here to talk about their newest book, We Live Here Now. Let's give them a big round of applause.
It is quite hot, isn't it? We were going to walk, and then we were like, how hot can it be? And we were like, Uber. Hot enough.
Right. Hello. Thank you all for being here. So my role really is to help you guys get a little bit of a sense of Sarah's new book. Which, as we've been just told by Patrick, it's been 7 years since your last visit
Behind Our Eyes was
to
last
the
time I was
US.
here. Yeah.
Behind Our Eyes, and you're back again now with Flatiron Books. And this is another of Sarah's mind benders, if those of you who are familiar with her work, and those twisty endings that you're so well known for. So, We Live Here Now. Beautiful cover.
It is a very good cover.
Tell us a little bit about this one.
It's a romantasy. I wish it would be like New York Times #1. It is not a romance. It is a story about a couple called Freddie and Emily. Emily is our main protagonist, and she and Freddie are in their 30s. They've been married a while, and they've just the year before they've been on holiday, she broke a leg. She got sepsis. She was in hospital for a long time. This is kind of prior to the start, so I'm not giving anything away. And when she comes round in the hospital, having everyone thinking she was going to die and, she's been in a coma, Freddie persuades her that they should sell their flat in London and move to the country. So they buy this house called Larkin Lodge, which is beautiful. It's in the Devon Moors. I don't know if anybody knows anything about Dartmoor. It is... to be fair, we flew over your desert yesterday, and it's not quite as barren and scary as that is to get lost in. But Dartmoor it's got a lot of quicksand. Which when I was a kid growing up, quicksand was the thing that we were scared of. It's literally been the thing I least need to be scared of in my life is quicksand and spontaneous combustion. I don't know why I worried about those things. But so it has it's boggy, it's barren, it's quite creepy, there's a lot of mist. So their house is in the middle of all this, near a little village. So they move into this house, and Emily very soon starts to think that things might be not so good in the house. Freddie is going to London to work still. She's there a lot on her own. And she starts to think that maybe the house is haunted and that maybe someone was murdered in it. So that is our premise. Freddie, being a man, is less convinced. That's the general premise of the book.
Yeah, okay. And the two main characters, obviously, they sort of are quite central to the story. But Emily, as your protagonist, as you said, has suffered quite a significant injury as we meet her at the beginning, which is quite isolating for her. And you talked about then her sort of leading into this space of becoming obsessive about this house. So tell us about that.
Well, I think, over the past 4 years, have injured myself a lot in many clumsy accidents. I broke my spine and then a dog in 2 places. The NHS told me I had torn a muscle, so that was good. We're lucky to have it, but at the same time. And then as I was recovering from that, a dog jumped on me in the park and I damaged my pelvis and tore loads of stuff. So I kind of wanted to put that into the book, the experience of that, because anyone who's had a lot of injury, you become quite paranoid as a starting point, like a crowd. You're like, don't push me, don't shove. Things that you've never thought about before Like, I wouldn't go to a gig necessarily. I mean, I'm 53, so I'm probably less likely. But, you know, like, my friends will go with their kids and say, oh, come on. I'm like, have you got seats? Are you standing in the middle? You really think through every eventuality of everything you do, as you know I have done, you know? So I kind of wanted Emily to have a little bit of this paranoia. And people are different with you, you know, because they expect you to be how you were before, but you've had something that's quite traumatic happen. So you do have a bit of PTSD without, I mean, people have had a lot worse injuries than me, but I exaggerated it for Emily. So she's going into this house already feeling like she's not quite herself. Her entire existence has gone from her, and that she's been off sick so long that she's lost her job that she was really keen on. She really liked her job. She was looking for a promotion. She thought she was getting the promotion. Suddenly she's got a payout, but she doesn't have a job. She's in a creepy house. She can't get to. So the house is, the middle floor is fine. That's where they've set up their bedroom and everything. But the top floor has a beautiful master suite, primary bedroom suite. But she can't get up the stairs yet. You know, so there's all this stuff that she can't quite do. And so I think it really adds to her self-doubt. Because she's had the sepsis, there is a thing called post-sepsis syndrome, which can make your senses can go funny. So you might see things a bit weird, you might hear things a bit weird. So she doesn't quite trust her own reactions either for a little while. So she feels very vulnerable in this house, which then starts behaving weirdly around her. And because she's had all this stuff, it's very easy for people to say, you've had a trauma. It's not the house, it's you. So I think it kind of plays into that kind of paranoid thriller element of it.
And you mentioned the house and Larkin Lodge, which is the name of the house. It's almost a character in itself in the book because it has such a personality. And it's quite gothic in the way that you've set it up. So how intentional was that? It
became more and more intentional with each draft of this book, in that when I started writing this book, A, I was injured, and B, I was writing a whole TV show at the time. So, and I was kind of in flux with what I wanted to write. So I had started it much more in the thriller zone, but it was leaning towards the creepier end because I was a little bit bored of writing the sort of straight thriller style, you know, husband-wife thing. And as the drafts went on, it was like, let's make it really dark winter. Let's make it, you know, let's really build up this atmosphere. And the Gothic is it is a whole setting of paranoia in and of itself. You know, the Gothic always has like a woman who is isolated, who is not sure of her surroundings. You have this place that's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we have a little village nearby, but the locals they're different. And, you know, you are far away from your life. You can't just text a friend and say, I'll meet you in the wine bar after work. I've had a terrible day. You know, it's when you live in those places, you have to, I mean, I don't know what it's like out here. You guys are in the city, but I should imagine if you live in a small town in this state, you could have quite a long drive to get anywhere, you know, like with a cinema or whatever. So to be isolated like that, I think is a very Gothic thing, but it feeds into both the thriller element and the horror element, you know, because that isolation when you don't trust yourself. I mean, I love the Gothic. I do like it. And it was quite nice to play in the horror sandpit a little bit without going too far.
Play again in the horror sandpit.
Play again in the horror sandpit, yeah.
And we're speaking about the Gothic, and one of the sort of real, sort of true Gothic elements of the book is the character of the Raven. And he, in a lot of ways, is actually responsible for the narrative within the book and kind of explaining some of what's happening. So tell us about him and tell us about how he came to be in the novel.
Well, it was I love the Raven. He's my favourite character, which I don't know what it says about Emily and Freddie, my two, the couple at the heart of it. But the Raven, when I first started writing it, because Emily had this accident, I kind of had a prologue where it was the accident, you know? And then I was like, is this really where I should be with this? And when I've got more and more Gothic, I was like, well, what is a really good symbol of the creepy Gothic? And a raven, you know, and Edgar Allan Poe and all that stuff. So I also didn't want there to be a moment of too much exposition where you have, you know, like explaining the house, you know, whereas having a raven's point of view, and the raven we start with the Raven, and he is watching the house, and he's been watching the house for a year. He doesn't like the house. His mate died in the house, but he can't quite bring himself to leave. And we keep coming back to the Raven and the little things that are happening with the Raven that echo what's happening with Freddie and Emily and their experiences with the house. Because, I mean, without giving anything away about the house, it is the top floor, the bit that Emily can't reach, that she starts to feel that something is very, very wrong in that part of the house. You know, it's that kind of... And the Raven helps us understand that part of the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Raven obviously has a relationship as well, but marriage and relationships...
He has two relationships.
Yes, he does.
He's a bad boy.
Wow. But marriage and relationships are very much a theme in the book, and they were obviously a theme in your bestseller Behind Her Eyes as well, but in a different way here. Obviously, we've talked about
Equally fucked up.
Equally fucked up. We don't expect anything less from you, Sarah. Fucked up is part of it.
That's like my Tinder dating profile. Fucked up.
But
cynical and fucked up.
Okay, so we've got Freddie and Emily, who we already talked about, and then you have some of their friends who come to visit from London that they've sort of known for a long time, and they meet couples from the village. So all these relationships. Tell us a little bit about them.
Well, I mean, I'm quite fascinated by marriage because I tried it once, and I turned out to be incompetent at marriage. I got married in Vegas, which was the first tell that I was incompetent at marriage. And I'm fascinated by long-term relationships. And obviously I've seen a lot of friends of mine who have had long-term relationships. And I've seen the paths from our 20s to our 50s, you know, and the ones that have worked and the ones that haven't. But I do think that the basis of all marriage starts with a lie. All long-term relationships start with lies. And I don't think they're necessarily bad lies, but I think when you meet someone and you really like them, and I think it happens more when you're young. Let this be a lesson to you, young lady. Like, you meet someone, you really like them, you think they're great, and your heart's like, oh my God, he's amazing, and he likes me. And then you're like, he can't possibly like me for me. I'm going to have to pretend to be better. So they like things that you then pretend to like. You know, like, especially when you're young. Like, I wasn't even that young. I was just stupid. In my 30s, early 30s, I dated someone. In fact, I lived with him. And he was a classical musician. So I obviously declared my love for classical music early on in this dating scenario in the vain hope that I would learn to like it. I did not. It was not Madonna. It did not sing to my soul. So I spent 3 years going to classical music things and opera, things that I really wanted to love. I really wanted to be the kind of woman who loved opera. I am not that person. I am shallow, you know. I just want my pop. So I think that every relationship starts with lies. And most people, the lies settle. You know, like the illusion falls away. You kind of like, you're in your sweatpants. They're not the god you thought they were. You're not the goddess they thought you. And everyone just goes, oh, thank God for that. We can just relax, you know. But I do think we start with the ability to lie to each other. So I do think that in a thriller marriage, you know, there's going to be more and more lies that feed off that. So we have Emily and Freddie, and when they got together, Freddie quite likes, I mean, he's never said it completely outright, but he quite likes the idea of a more trad wife. They have some babies. She stays at home. She kind of played along with that, but deep down she wanted a career. She was enjoying her job. And they still have their friends, and I guess we all do to a certain extent, friends from university or college, and you've kind of grown up together, and you're still friends. So they have a couple where one of them is like a investment banker, so doing super well, and the wife is like perfectly turned out all the time and still gorgeous. And then they've got the other couple where they're both teachers, and he's a bit radical. She wants him to work in a private school. It's all, you know, like there's little cracks starting to show. And Emily looks at them sometimes and she's like, yes, I do love them, but are we really friends anymore? What do we have in common other than we know each other? But none of them have healthy relationships. They're in that horrible quagmire of being in their 30s, where they're realizing that life isn't going to be the life they necessarily thought it was, and maybe they should have worked harder at stuff, and are they happy, and all that stuff that, you know, people say midlife crisis is 40s and 50s, but I think it's 30s with young children and you're tired and, you know, it's all work and trying to build a life and not getting the sight of it, you know? So we have all these couples that are very London and very big city. And then we have Emily, who's obviously a bit more fragile. And then she meets this couple in the village who used to live in the house called Joe and Sally. And Emily and Freddie have this kind of thing that, I mean, I used to live in London. Londoners have it when they move out. It's a bit like, we're big city. You know, we know everything. And, you know, we're cool. And then she meets Sally and Joe, who are in their 40s. And he's a painter. And, you know, I don't often visualize characters, but he was like kind of a young Jeremy Irons, a 40-year-old Jeremy Irons, 45-year-old Jeremy Irons, so peak hot. You know? And he's an artist who paints naked women, and his wife's really cool with it. And it starts to make Emily feel like quite dowdy, you know, like they're like super cool. They're like these people in their 40s that are stylish and cool. And they start to have more and more of an influence on her, and she starts to think that maybe things are not quite right in their marriage either, and there's something sort of sinister going on there. But it all ties to the house and this investigation. She starts to think someone was murdered there, but she can't figure out who or why, and there is no record of it. But yeah, she does.
And a lot of that ties into this idea of this book being a psychological thriller. I found it very creepy. I know Patrick found it quite creepy, as we heard from earlier.
Yeah, bunch of chickens.
I certainly there's creepy stuff in the book. Would you say it's a scary book, or would you say it's more of a psychological thriller?
Well, I'm not going to lie. I did try and make it creepy. And I think because it is a haunted house to a certain extent and stuff happens, there are, you know, creaking doors and scratch. You know, she hears like scratching coming from the floor of upstairs room, and books come off bookshelves, and there are messages, and, you know, they do a Ouija board. So yes, there are a lot of tropes of horror in it, but all of those things support the psychological thriller element. I mean, the house, there are many secrets in the house, so this is not giving anything away, but the house has anyone seen the film The Devil's Advocate? There's a film where Keanu Reeves goes to work for Al Pacino, and he's a lawyer, and Al Pacino is a devil. And Keanu Reeves' life gets more and more decadent, and it all explodes, and he kind of blames the devil. And Al Pacino says, you had a choice. It was always had a choice. And so it's similar in Larkin Lodge. So some of the creepy stuff, like sometimes like Freddie, he overhears Emily, like they're having a party and a door creaks open and he hears Emily saying something derogatory about him. But his choice is to let it fester. Like if they were in a healthy relationship, you go to bed and you say, I'm actually a bit pissed off with you because I overheard you say such and such and it really hurt my feelings. And then they can be like, whoa, no, you only heard one bit of it. What I actually said was. So it's that, you know, the house does that kind of stuff to them. So there's a lot of creepy little bits and pieces. I mean, I wouldn't want to live there in no uncertain terms. But I mean, I really like creepy stuff. And actually it's, you know, I started out as a horror writer. So blending it with the thrillers is quite fun. But when I was writing it, when I handed it into my agent, my UK agent, I know I want it to be creepy, but she knew the whole story. She knew how it all plays out. And she was like, I don't know if it's that creepy. And I was really offended. And I was like, I think you should read it again. But then my American agent, who didn't know anything about the story, she kept messaging me going, oh my God, the third floor. Oh my God, what's happening here? Oh my, I was like, okay, that works. So, but I'm hoping it's like it's not, you know, like when I was a kid, I read it when I was about 15 and
too young.
Oh no, I loved it. But when I was going to sleep, I had to put it in the drawer. And I remember being at boarding school, and for one time I had my own room. You know, like I was at that age, and there was a sink in my bedroom, and I wanted a glass of water at night, and I got up and I had the light off, and I remember running the sink and looking at the water going down, and all I could hear was, we all float down here. And I was like, oh my God, put the light on, go back to sleep. So I mean, it's not that level of scary. I haven't got those kind of horror chops. You know, he's king for a reason. But you know, like I'm hoping it's creepy enough. But I think it's also creepy in a kind of Hitchcock way. It's quite arch, you know, like there should be some wry moments in there. It's not like there are lessons to be taken from the book.
Yeah.
In a fun way. I think it's a comedy.
I don't. And sort of, you said, you refer to Larkin Lodge as a haunted house. Do you believe in ghosts, or have you had any experiences which feel like there might have been something there?
Well, I'm always cynical about these things, I worked with a producer on my last book, Insomnia. We turned it into a 6-parter for Paramount Plus. It's not over here yet, but it was on in UK last year. And when I first we brought on a new line producer, and when I first met her, she's quite into her woo-woo, and she was saying, "Oh, my friend sent me this video from LA, and look, there's a ghost walking in the background of the shot." I said, "It's not a ghost, it's a child." Just that's a set-up video. And I was so cynical, and she's sort of. But that said, I was always the kid that was scared all night. Anyway, my parents had to send me to boarding school to stop me waking my mum up every 20 minutes because there was a monster under the bed or whatever. But when I was about 25, 26, I was working as a rental agent, letting houses to people, and I was there was a town nearby where I lived, and it was a real old, railway town. So the houses were a couple of 100 years old. And I was waiting to show it to 3 women who were going to share it, young women. So I thought, well, I'll better go in and check that the previous tenants haven't wrecked it, So I went in, and I was looking to buy a house at the time, and I was walking around it thinking, yeah, this is a good house. I'd be happy with this house. I really liked it. And then I went upstairs, and this is part of where the idea for the 3rd floor bedroom in this book came from. And I went into the first bedroom, and I was like, yeah, it's really nice. I could have this bedroom. I went into the little bedroom, and I was like, yeah. I went into the middle bedroom, and honest to God, it was like every bad thing that ever happened in the world happened in that room. I felt like I was in Amityville. It was just horrible. I just couldn't stay in it. It was just this horrible black feeling, horrible feeling. And so I went and waited outside. I just went back out on the street, and I thought, I'm not staying in that house. And when I showed them round and we got to that room, I still felt exactly the same. And they were fine. They just didn't feel anything. So it was obviously just me. But as much as I say I don't believe in ghosts and stuff, so for my 50th birthday, about 20 of us, with kids and everything, went to France, and we rented a chateau. And it was a big old chateau. It was a rickety chateau because we had children with us, and we didn't want to be like, don't touch it, that kind of thing. So I had a pool outside. And my party days are quite well and truly over, and I'm an early bird, So there was one night when we were outside and everyone was drinking, and we'd finished eating, and I was just like, it's like 9:30, 10 o'clock. I thought, I'm just going to go. I'm done. I'm going upstairs. So even the kids were still out. So party. Woo. So I went up to my bedroom, and it because it was my birthday, I had the best bedroom, but it was big, and it had this ensuite bathroom. It was all very sort of creepy. And so I was like, I can do this. I'm 50 years old. I am a grown-up. Going to bed on my own in a castle, it's not a problem. A chateau. So I got into bed, and I was like, yep. Turn the light out. 10 seconds later, turn the light back on. Texted Baria, can you come and chat to me? Because I was just like, nope, it's too creepy. So for all my Billy Big bollocks when I'm in daylight, when it comes to nighttime, I'm like, me. But I was the same at boarding school. You'd be if you were at the top of the house, if you were sick, you had to stay in your bed, and everyone would go for dinner. And these old houses, everyone would be down having tea. And you were up in your bed on your own with a stomach bug, and I would dread it. And then I would see other kids who were sick. They didn't care. They were just in, and I was like, what is wrong with you people? There are werewolves and monsters and vampires and things in the cupboard. And yeah.
Well, you are blessed with that imagination. So
I used to wake up. There was one girl, if I couldn't sleep, God love her, Katie Westcombe, her name was. I used to get out of my bed and go and wake Katie Westcombe up and get into her bed and say, will you talk to me until I get to sleep? And she'd be talking to me till about 4 o'clock in the morning. And then I would fall asleep. And she would just be knackered all day. She was like a year older than me, but I just couldn't. I used to tuck myself right on my head, under my head, so the monsters couldn't see me.
She was Baria 1.0.
She was Baria 1.0.
Yeah.
You got it easy.
Okay, so you've talked about this a little bit, and it's kind of a cliche question, but I think people want to know usually, where do your ideas come from? Where do you find sort of this
steal
inspiration?
them from Stephen King.
Right.
No, I think it's quite. People always go, oh, but I think it's quite a valid question because it's different when people are writing their first book, but when you're under contract and you've got to come up with another one, you know, like, it's not just sitting around waiting for the muse to strike. You have to train your brain to look for ideas. And before I started writing this one, I was writing another one. I was planning another book, and I just couldn't. I had kind of the setup and the world, but I couldn't quite figure the story out. And I was a little bit like, oh, I'm not sure. And I watched, I think it was called, I want to say Dark Water. It was a Patricia Highsmith adaptation with Ben Affleck and Anna de Sarnes. I think, is that her name? Beautiful.
Anna Darmas.
Anna the really beautiful woman.
Yes, that one.
And it was, I thought, a terrible film, you know, but I really loved this key dynamic of this couple that appear like they're fine, and they've both got secrets from each other, and it was just like such an unhealthy, and there were bits of each other that they really didn't like, in that way that, you know, when you first get together with someone, like, you can kind of go, oh, the way they eat is really cute, and then 2 years later you're like, if he makes that noise again, I am going to peel his eyes. You know, like, it's these little things that, like, I am terrible for I'm terrible at put like lids on jars. You know, like, I'll take jam out of the fridge or whatever, and I'm like, put it on my toast, kind of put the lid on, put it back in the fridge, and then someone takes a smash. You know, you've got honey, you've got jam, you've got everything. And I always thought that was just a sweet quirk of mine, but according to many boyfriends, it's grounds for divorce after like the 5th jar. So they had this kind of dynamic in this couple, and I thought, God, you know, like, we kind of have to rub along together, but there are so many things about coupledom that if you could ever read your partner's thoughts, there would never be any marriages left. Like, you can love someone, but we're never kind in our thoughts, are we? We get annoyed. And so when I watched this film, the film in and of itself was not great, but the core concept of this couple trying to muddle through while not overly liking each other, but still kind of loving each other. I thought, oh, I think I can play with that. So it kind of came from that. That was where that idea came from. But you see people who, I think Ian Rankin cuts out newspaper articles, and I prefer to watch cheesy real life crime programs, you know, like Deadly Women, Couples Who Kill. I'm like, it's research, episode 7 for the day. You know, but there's so much, you know, and unfortunately there is so much terrible stuff happens in the world, you know, especially in couples, which are such a fodder for thrillers. You know, especially over the past 15 years, that sort of couple thriller thing has really taken off.
And so you've got now this idea. You've seen something. You've picked up in one of these shows or a movie or whatever, stolen from Stephen King. How do you know when it's the right time to now start writing the novel?
Well, I think when you're starting out, you get very caught up. I don't see people do it so much anymore. But back in the day, when I was a younger, optimistic author, you'd see people on Twitter or Facebook, they'd be like, I've written 4,000 words today, I write another 5,000 tomorrow. And it was like, Jesus Christ, I'm gonna know. But actually, I think the thinking time is the most important thing. So I'll mull. Like, I'm mulling the next book while I'm halfway through the one I'm currently writing, you know? So you're kind of mulling it. And then I'll kind of think, okay, once I give them a name, the characters a name, it starts to formulate a bit more. But I normally have a core concept that I'm kind of going to play with, but I have to get the ending absolutely locked in. So that the last chapter of Behind Her Eyes was in the book pitch. So I did the book pitch and I put the last chapter on the end. So that kind of sold that. So with this one, I had the entire epilogue in my head, probably word for word, maybe, before I even started thinking about writing. So once I know where I'm headed, then I've got a notebook and I will kind of think, okay, so we're starting here, we've got to get to here, put some, where I think some good reversals will be and some return, you know, like, where can I have a twist, where can I surprise, where do I want the reader to be at this point, I want them to be just here before, you know, this, or, and obviously it's subject to change as you write, but I kind of tent pole it with those beats, and then plan 10,000 words, write that 10,000 words, plan another 10,000 words, and things change, but the ending never changes.
And so you're almost working backwards.
Surprise!
On tour anybody who knows her will know that this should not come as a surprise to you. What's your sort of, you know, your average writing day like? I know the answer to this. I'll let them.
Revolves around my dog. Just looking at the dog at the back there. Well, it used to be, I'm an early bird, so it used to be wake up really early and try and knock out, she says, like a professional writer, a couple of thousand words, in bed, preferably with lots of tea, by about 10 or 11 in the morning. Because if you've kind of pre-planned what you're going to do, you can, the writing is the easy part, it's the plotting that's the hard part. And then get up, do some exercise, go for a walk, all the stuff like go to the supermarket, put the washing on, all the interesting things. And then in the afternoon, when I was just writing books, I would plan the next day's work. But then I got a dog. So now I get up. The dog is like, I think we're going to the park now. I think we are. Yes, we are. Get your clothes on. Come on. So we're out for like an hour and a half in the morning. Then I come back and start some work. And then I tend to work all morning. Not necessarily like, I have phone calls and other bits. And then the dog is like, I think we're going out again. So then we go out again. And then in the afternoon, I tend to I'm not so great in the afternoon. Like that tends to be like, I'll just watch one episode of something. And then suddenly you're 3 hours later, you've watched like half a show. And then you're like, might as well watch the rest. So the afternoons, I'm not so great. But then in the evenings, I might do some more, But it all depends on what my workload is. Because it used to be just books. And now it's books and TV and some film and other bits and pieces. I mean, at the moment, because pilots are out and doing the rounds, I'm just working on a book, and that's quite a nice feeling, to just be in the book. I think it's good to respect the books. The books are bread and butter, like they're solid, and it's nice to just work on something for a little while where it's only you, only your own head.
Yeah. And this book kind of feels like a bit of a sister book to the Behind Her Eyes, which was your, the last time that you were here. And obviously that was then taken to Netflix and it became a huge hit there. What was that process like, sort of, seeing something that you'd written as a novel, moving on to the screen?
Well, the authors have different reactions to these things. Now, because I'm a screenwriter as well, I'm a great believer in if you sell the rights to your book, unless you're adapting it yourself, you go, there you go, thank you for the option money. It's yours. It's your baby. The book is mine. You can do what you want. So I really liked the company Left Bank who made it. And we obviously then went on to make Insomnia together. So I got on well with them all. And they would email me and say, do you want to read the scripts? And I'd be like, nope, not my business. No one wants notes from the author. And I know authors who have fallen for that. And they think people actually want their notes. I'm like, no one wants your notes. That's the screenwriter's job. And they're having enough battles without the author saying, it wasn't like that in the book. Who needs that? So, Steve Lightfoot, who adapted it, is an amazing writer. And I was like, way more experienced than me. Let him get on with it. He knows what he's doing. But I went to the read-through, and that was great. And obviously did like a cameo thing and then have worked with the company since. But they were very faithful, which was great. It was a very faithful adaptation. But it came out on Netflix we were still in lockdown in England. And so other friends of mine who'd had Netflix things, they'd gone to Netflix, they'd all dressed up, had a party, and it'd all been great. Our cast and crew screening thing was on Zoom, not quite the same. And then when it came out on that day, I guess you guys had bubbles as well. Did you have the people you were allowed to in the lockdown? You had a bubble. We were so my mum and my sister lived together. And so I had to be a bubble with them because, polite, So I was like, right, we're going to watch my show. We're going to watch all of it. They looked thrilled. So I went around with a bottle of champagne. But we had such a classy family. We had a bottle of champagne and a KFC bucket. And so we were like, right. So my sister, we watched it. And my mum's she's now 84. So she was coming up 80. And so I made them watch all 6 episodes. And when we got to the end, I turned it off. And I was like, so what did you think? And my mum's Scottish. Praise does not come easily to her at the best of times. So she paused. And she went, oh, that Adele. Poor Adele. I said, yeah, poor Adele. And she said, it was all going so well for her until the aliens came. And me and my sister, if you haven't read the book, there are no aliens. So me and my sister were just and I was like, sorry, wait, just rewind. It's the aliens. She said, yes, the aliens. Just, what alien? She went, you know, all the lights. I was like, you fell asleep, didn't you? You fell asleep. I said, you fell asleep around episode 4. She was like, well, I don't know. I was like, great. So this was my exciting thing. But it was like, the weird thing was, like, when you write a book, it's quite delayed reaction. You write it, you hand it in, and then, you know, like people write reviews on Amazon, you cry a bit, and then, like, you know, or your Goodreads. But with this, it was like the producer, Jess, she's now like at Netflix, and she was messaging me, and we'd had some like The Guardian in England, which is quite a snooty paper. They didn't like it, and it was like trashy and all this stuff. And Jess was like, oh, The Guardian hated it. I said, Jess, have you looked at the hashtag on Twitter? And she was like, what do you mean? She goes, I'm not on Twitter. I said, you don't have to be on Twitter to look at the hashtag. And we just couldn't keep up with it. You know, like it was going mad. And it was such an unusual feeling. And she was then hooked. She kept saying, I can't get off it. I can't get off it. But it was, because we were in lockdown, a friend of mine, she printed out, it's on the, you know, I don't know if you guys do this, but we have like the downstairs restroom, you know, the downstairs toilet. You always put the comedy pictures up in there. So a friend of mine had printed out on an A4 sheet some of the tweets about the show and put it in this really bad frame. And when lockdown was over, she was like, she left it on my doorstep. And she was like, I can put it in a better frame. I was like, no, this stays. This like cheap frame, she'd stolen it from another picture. But it was that was amazing because it was so immediate. You know, I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to see it if they were saying I hate it. And some people hated it, obviously, but it was the ending. So it was a really buzzy feeling, despite the fact that it was, you know, lockdown. But in some ways, maybe that worked for us because everyone was bored and needed something to watch. So I was there for that. Thank you, COVID. No, you know.
Except for your mum.
Except for my mum, who fell asleep. You know, she likes to keep it real.
And you yourself have worked as a screenwriter even before then, but since then with Insomnia. So talk about that a bit.
Oh, I quite like it. I mean, and I like adapting my own stuff in that you can rip it all up and start again. You know, like I'm not a purist. Like there are some writers who, you know, like some writers think they're really great writers. I'm like the opposite of that. I like look back and I'm like, Jesus Christ, what were you thinking? You know, so when you get to adapt it, you get to pull it apart and tell it a different way. So that is good fun. And obviously 6 hours of television is more than a book, you know, so you have to add but it does change. It has definitely changed, hopefully, the way I write a book. So and weirdly, you learn so much, like you think you're long in the tooth, but only when I was reading and crying, Goodreads reviews of early Goodreads reviews and stuff. And so many people were saying, oh, I love the short chapters. I love and I'd never really considered short chapters before and how important they are to readers. So that was a learning curve. But that also, I think I started doing it from TV because you write a scene for TV and it's like you come in too early and you leave too late. So you can chop and that's your scene. So sometimes I'll find myself, and like earlier this afternoon in the hotel, I was writing a chapter in a book and I was like, why am I starting this here? Why am I giving this waffle? I don't need this. Come in here. And that has come from being shouted at in script meetings, you know, and having to cut to fit, you know, like right up to the last minute, you know, you can fight for a scene I mean, that's what's so crazy about TV. It's like when authors email me and say, oh, I've read the scripts for my show, I hate it. I'm like, it's not going to be what gets filmed. And then there's the edit and half this is going to get, you're getting angry about something that is not what you're going to see anyway, you know? So, I've forgotten what I was going to say, Barry. It's like my 53-year-old brain just sweated it out.
You're talking about how it's kind of changed the process.
Yeah, it has. And so I'm a bit more strict with myself, a bit more ruthless with the story. I mean, the one I'm writing now is a bit more languid. You know, it's set in the heat, so you have a bit more kind of description-y stuff. But I do think that will come out in the edit. I'll be like, chop that up. And dialogue, I think, changes. You know, you have to, like, book dialogue is different to TV dialogue, but I find that I'm kind of like tighter on it, maybe.
And with We Live Here Now, are there plans to bring this story to the screen?
Well, I did have a lot of TV offers on it already, but none that I felt were companies I necessarily, because I would adapt it, so they weren't companies I necessarily wanted to. Very nice people, but you kind of think, is this a person I want to get in a fight with for the next 3 years? You know, because you have to think we get on well enough that you can argue, you know, you can go into battle together, you know? And so and also, and this is so cynical, I now look and think who's likely to get it made. And I understand the industry so much better now. It used to be like who's going to pay me the most for the option, and now it's who's most likely to get this made. And I am working with a producer on a movie of a book of mine called The Death House that I adapted with him, and he made Bohemian Rhapsody, and we get on really well. And he read it, and so we were on the phone today, and he was like, "Oh, I really want to. Can we do this together?" So I'm kind of like keeping my powder dry because the book's not out in UK yet. It's only just come out here. So it's, it's interesting to see how things play out. But my gut will be I will probably sell it to him because we have such a great working relationship, and he's so good on some producers are less good on story than some are really good at the business and some are really good at story. He's good at the business and story. Like his notes are really good when you're working on a draft, and he's taught me a lot about film. But I see it as a film. Right. It's claustrophobic. It's to make it a 6-part TV, you'd have to add a lot of story. It would become a different beast, So I think a movie is where I would see it fitting. So yeah, I will sell the option whether we see it on screen or not. Would be the lap of the gods, as is always the way. Fingers crossed, because that's a nice paycheck.
And you mentioned hotel room writing a little bit earlier today. So you are working.
You make me sound like a hooker.
I wasn't going to say it. But you are working on the next book, the next novel. Any clues that you're willing to give?
Well, it's a funny one, this one. So I, about 10 years ago, wrote a novella called They Say a Girl Died Here Once for Earthling Press, which is a horror limited edition company. And my UK editor read it, and she really loved it. But obviously I wrote it a long time ago, and she was like, we want this to be our next Orion book. But can you add 100 pages? Obviously, because it was a novella, and we need to make it. And then I reread it. So what I've done is I've taken the core of that book, and I'm now writing it as a much more thriller with supernatural, rather, and I'm 8 years older and 8 years deeper in my writing career, and I want to explore different things. So it's kind of it'll probably have the same title, but it will be a very different book to that. But it's about the core concept is the same, although even the baddie and everything is different, But it's about a family. It's sort of 3 generations of women. So our main character is a girl she's 24, Anna, and she has dropped out of college because she had a bad experience happened, and her grandmother is developing Alzheimer's, her mum's a single mom, and they all buy this house in Nebraska, an area I'm very familiar with. But it's like in a drought. It's a farming community in a drought. And she has a little sister called Caroline. So we have these 4 women of different ages all in this house together. And as any women who live in houses together know, you can love each other and drive each other mad. So it's like they have this. So the mother's got Alzheimer's. The grandmother's starting to go Alzheimer's. And she's been quite judgmental of Anna. But they kind of fought. Anna had a horrible thing happen to her at college, but she can't remember it. So they both have this issue with memory. And there are 2 girls who have been murdered in this town. One 3 years ago, one 6 years ago, both found in these fields in a drought. And Anna starts to get a little bit obsessed with finding out what happened to them. So it is a kind of investigation. It is a thriller. It's not first-person narrative, husband-wife. It's nice to write something about. It's kind of more. It is a crime thriller, but it's probably more a crime supernatural than a thriller supernatural, if that makes sense, So I'm really enjoying, like in England, we have a lot of folk horror novels, So I kind of was like, if I was going to write an American folk horror novel, how would I do that? So it's got elements of folk horror, and I love shows like Midnight Mass and, these kind of things where you've got these small communities, which I think like American fiction does so well, and again, that king thing, you grow up with the king fiction. So we'll see if I've done it okay when the book comes out. But thankfully, American editors will go through it with a red pen. But, I'm really enjoying it. It's, so it's set in America and, yeah, it's slightly different.
Great, and we look forward to that. But coming back
I
to
look
this,
forward to finishing it.
I look forward to reading it. But we're coming back to this one now, and in a minute, I'm just going to hand over to the audience for their questions. But my last one is, you talked about the ending. This is one of those Sarah Pinborough signature WTF endings. How do you want people to feel as they're reading that epilogue and as they're sort of coming to the end of this book?
Well, I mean, I wanted people to find the Behind Her Eyes ending funny, so I'm not quite sure how that worked out. But this one is wry. I think, I want people to read the epilogue and smile and then be nicer to their partner. I think there should be a moment of maybe we should just be nicer to each other and it will work out better. And I think it should be a Hitchcockian raised eyebrow smile. I think it's a funny ending in its own Behind Her Eyes kind of funny ending way.
Funny.
Creepy funny.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes. If you've got any questions for Sarah in the audience, then please do ask.
The dog doesn't because it's been asleep.
There's one at the back. Are you guys going to
I'm putting my 53-year-old glasses on.
All right, hold on just a second. I'm going to run to you.
Ah.
All right, who has a question? Go for it.
Speaking of Behind Her Eyes, I've been wondering this ever since I read that lovely ending. How did you come up with it? What was the idea? I was like, this is it. This is how I'm going to end it.
Well, it was an odd one, that one actually, because I was at there was a big convention called it was a Worldcon, and it was called Longcon, and it was in London, and it was there was 15,000 people, and I was being published by Galance and another publisher, but I hadn't quite broken through to the next level, and I'd been publishing for quite a long time, and I was doing all right, and I was making a living, and it was my only job. But I remember thinking, I was seeing people getting big deals and taking the next step, and I was like, maybe that's not going to happen for me. You was like, oh, is this how much shelf life do I have left? And then Natasha Barden at HarperCollins texted me, and she was like, oh, we're going for dinner. Do you want to come for dinner? I was like, no, I'm going to go home. And she said, well, let's get a beer. So we went for a drink, and she just said, we don't think you're being published well. We think you could be a much bigger, commercial success than you are, blah, blah, blah. So she said, can you pitch me something? And I already owed 2 books elsewhere at this point. And I was like, well, I haven't got anything. And she went, well, I've got an acquisitions meeting in 10 days. Just pitch me something. It doesn't have to be brilliant. Now, anyone who's ever tried to sell a book knows that you can't just wing, oh, yeah, that's shit, but we'll buy it. It just doesn't happen, So I was like, right, how hard can it be to come up with something? So it was an awful week. I was looking after my friend's dog, had to have it put down. They were in LA, so the dog suddenly took really ill, and it transpired it had a big tumor in its so the dog had to be put down. A friend of mine, a great writer called Graham Joyce, was on his deathbed, and that, that was not going well. And I was trying to come up with this idea, and I wanted to write something about a couple and an affair and, this obsessional love. And I kept making these notes and thinking, oh, it's not, what's different about this? So this is just very run of the mill. So I did what any self-respecting person would do in this situation. I went to the pub and I bought myself a large wine, and I thought my life is over. I've got this big opportunity and I've fucked it before I've started. And then I just suddenly was like, what if this person that we think is dead is not dead? And then it kind of, and I love dreams and dreaming, and I wanted to have dreams in it. And it just kind of went from there. And then I suddenly was like, oh, that's bonkers. I'm going to try that. So, yeah. I mean, often when I read a book, sometimes I'll be like, that book was so outrageous. It just doesn't make any sense. And then a friend of mine will go, you wrote Behind Her Eyes. I'm like, okay, yeah, fair enough. It's crazy. But yeah, it was, it was literally panic. Panic gave me that ending because I was like, I've got to get this. So yeah, it was just like, yeah. But it has served me well, that book, yeah. All right.
Any other questions?
So Sarah, I'm really curious. So you're one of the most so horror's getting a comeback right now, and you've started writing horror. So what drew you to A, writing horror, and B, why do you think that horror has just blossomed in terms of sales and interest?
I mean, I started writing horror because I think anyone of my generation who's started reading dark fiction, we all wanted to be Stephen King. You know, like I bumped into Michael Lamo when we were in Long Island. Yeah, and he started out in Leisure Books with me, which was a real horror kind of company. And we were just saying how we all were writing our own kind of wannabe Stephen King novels when we started out because it's such an influence. But horror always appealed to me. I've always liked horror. I've watched a lot of horror movies, you know. But I do think that now, I mean, I think we go in cycles. Like the psychological thriller cycle is fading because, you know, you get gluts in the market, don't you? Like in the 90s, horror died because after King and James Herbert and Clive Barker, everyone was writing it and a lot of it was shit. So there was a lot of it published. It started to lose its sort of value. But I do think that horror always does well when the world is going to shit. You know, like, it's like we want to read something where people are having a worse time than we are. And it's, you know, and there is a sense of the supernatural, or there is a sense of something otherworldly. So it is terrifying. You know, like serial killer fiction was big for a while, but, you know, and that is kind of horror, you know? But I do think that we lean into the supernatural when we are struggling in the world, and it is a great escapism that allows us to have our fears and stuff, but have a nice resolution. Although invariably, like, if it's a proper horror, there's always that little coda at the end where you're like, oh, it's all wrapped up. Oh, no, it's not. You know, like Christine or whatever. But, I think all books go in cycles, doesn't it? All these genres go in cycles. I mean, the only one that seems consistent is crime, like proper procedural crime seems to consistently keep going. But I'm all for the horror resurgence. It's like the gutter coming. When I first started going to crime festivals, I remember we have a big one in England called Harrogate Crime Festival, and it's like the biggest in Europe. And I remember watching some crime authors talking about how they weren't respected in literary circles, you know, and I just wanted to say, come down to horror and sci-fi. We'll show you what it's like to be ignored, you know, like, but yeah, I mean, I think there's some great horror. And I think a lot of the horror writers have they've learned the lessons of how to skirt the right side of commercial so as not to put people off, because you hear a lot of people that say, oh, I never read horror. But they've never read horror, so how do they know they never read horror? And then when they read, you know, they read it, they're like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. You know, good horror is the same as a good thriller. You know, the difference between a crime novel and a ghost story is in one, the victim speaks. You know, that's it.
I read quite a few of your leisure books back in the
Gosh,
day.
they're
so,
getting Orion are reprinting them. Orion are re-releasing
that's
them
awesome.
in England. Yeah. Someone did say to me, Breeding Ground, which is about spiders. They were like, that's your best book. It's like, fuck off.
Any other questions from the audience?
You cannot let fuck off be the last one.
So I love the horror aspect. Have you ever thought of adding in like the apocalyptic with the horror and making it, I don't know. I love dark books.
I refer you
so
back to
real
the
dark.
spiders.
Yeah, I haven't read that one. So
that was
clearly I need
apocalyptic. No, I love an apocalypse novel. I mean, like The Stand was my big go-to before. They only, you know, like I loved the abridged version, which was only like 700 pages. Now they're like the 2,000 page one is a little too much for me. But no, I love an apocalypse novel. You know, The Passage, all those. So I would do it, but I don't think my editors, I think it would be taking it too far because I'm signed for crime thriller, you know, so they will like, especially Christine at Flatiron, and they understand that I've never been very good at staying in the lines, but the lines are still there. So if I was suddenly going to say, oh, well, this is post-apocalyptic, they'd be like, no, wait till you're out of contract, then write that one. But yeah, I love a post-apocalypse, love it.
Okay, I got a question for you.
Go for it.
What would you do if you got an email from Russell T. Davies asking you to write a really creepy Doctor Who episode?
Well, I mean, I would say yes. But, I mean, I haven't watched Doctor Who in about 7 years, I don't think, 8 years. I think probably since Matt Smith, maybe, I've stopped watching it. I didn't watch the Jodie, I almost said Jodie Foster, that would be weird, wouldn't it? Jodie Foster, Doctor Who. Jodie Whittaker, not because it was a woman, but she is an actress. She's a lovely woman, apparently, but everything about her as an actress really annoys me. You know, like Broadchurch really annoyed me. So when she became Doctor Who, I kind of dropped off, and then I've not gone back. I mean, I mean, I would, but I'm not a massive fan of writing other people's worlds. I did 2 Torchwood novels, and when they offered me that, I had to go away and watch. I did that thing because I was just trying to write full time, and my friend Mark Morris was editing that series, and he was like, "Would you write a Torchwood novel?" And so they sent me an email saying, pitch for it. I was like, "I'd love to. I love the show." And I was still teaching, and I had to run into the classroom next to me. And my friend Lucy, her husband George, was very good at dodgily downloading TV shows, back in the day. And I ran in. I was like, "Lucy, I need Torchwood. I need it tomorrow." And I really enjoyed the show because it was darker and more adult. But I'd never seen it until that point. And I don't know. I mean, I was a kid. I loved Doctor Who as a kid, but for me, it's kids' TV. I know a lot of adults love it, but I'm like, I sometimes feel like it should be creepier. And I loved like the statues one and stuff like that. That was, and then my boyfriend had kids, and I left a statue on our stairs, like a little bust in the night, so that when they woke up, they're like, "Oh, the statue was there." But yeah, I would do it because the kudos. But I also think I'd be nervous of the fandom. I think would make me nervous because if you don't get it right, it can be quite.
They'll come for you.
They'll come for you.
So what is life like post kind of horror being more the crime fiction novelist now? Do you find that you enjoy being in both worlds and kind of coming back to that world with We Live Here Now?
Because I've got so many friends from the horror world from the early days, Brian Keane and all the, people, we all sort of came up together. And I love going to horror conventions because I feel like crime thriller I love. I've got loads of great mates in crime thriller, but there are a lot more careers in crime thriller. So there is a lot more. You're being very professional. When you go to a horror convention, it's like room party, get the pizza, get the beer. It's really. I like crossing both, and I am really enjoying writing the creepy. I mean, the new one, They Say a Girl Died Here Once, is probably equally in the sort of crossover space. And I would write a horror novel for sure. I would because when I signed the new deal with Galance and Orion, they were very good. They said you can write they said fatal mistake. You can write whatever you want, which I am holding up on a card. So I have had thoughts of a horror novel, but I'll need to make it a commercial horror novel. But yeah, I would definitely go dark.
So in the back, we were talking a little bit about the Amityville house.
Yeah, this woman came we were in the Long Island thing, and this woman at the signing, she was like, because I'd mentioned like the Amityville house and whatever, and she said, "Oh, I live opposite that house," and she had a young family live in it now, and it's like, I could not ever, for all my, I mean, it's not the Amityville house, it's got its own problems. Larkin Lodge, it's not a happy home in its own way, but you are what you bring to it. I find houses fascinating anyway. I think the way we move through them and what they keep of us and what they don't, whether you're dead or alive, how much of you lingers in the house is always a fascination for me. Well, during my somewhat disappointing marriage, short and disappointing, my husband decided we were moving to Devon, into a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. So it is physically in my head the farmhouse we lived in, but it was not a creepy house. I mean, to the point of having heard me calling her up to keep me company. When I lived in that house and our marriage broke down and he moved out, I stayed in that house on my own and I was never creeped out in it. So it was a nice house, but it was like, you'd look out a window and there'd be mist and, and there were like proper country people lived there. It was like in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I remember getting the local paper and in the crime section, someone had stolen someone's wing mirror. That was the crime section. And when we moved in, we had next to the house was the graveyard, and then like there was a church. We were in like a hamlet, and the vicar came to introduce himself. And my husband's name was Kane, And so he said to him, and you are? And he said, Kane. He said, oh, Kane. And he said, no, Cain. And you could see the vicar going, burn them. Like I was like, they're going to burn us as witches. I mean, they were all very lovely people, but it definitely came from that, and that sense of being like, he would go to work and I would sit there. I was where I wrote The Hidden there, actually. I wrote my first book there, but I would sit there on my own in that house, and you'd have to drive 4 miles to get a pint of milk, and it was very, so it did kind of come from there. But I think this is probably a bit of a nicer house on the inside than our farmhouse was. My sister-in-law
in
used to
some
call
ways.
it going indoor camping at Sarah and Kane's house because it was like cold and windy and.
So is Larkin Lodge at times.
Yes, it is. Oh yeah, because Larkin Lodge has this thing where it's the little things with couples. Like, so for Freddie, he always finds the house too hot. Emily always finds the house too cold. Freddie always finds the house too hot. There's a window that opens and closes, and they're arguing about who's opening it, who's closing it. And so there's all the house plays those kind of little tricks with them. Yeah, it's a cheeky bugger, that house.
You keep making it sound like a much gentler, fun place.
It's
than
misunderstood.
It's misunderstood. Much like you, Sarah
Much like
Pinborough.
myself.
I think that's probably about time, unless there's any more questions.
Absolutely. The sudden comfort brand name chairs suddenly become uncomfortable after about an hour.
Right.
I am sure that for those of you who can, I know, first of all, let's give Sarah a big round of applause. Congratulations.
Coming out in the heat.
Making it out. For those of you who can, if you don't mind just placing your chair to the side, we want to say thank you. Go ahead and also get in line. Don't hesitate to get pictures with Sarah. She'll be glad to sign your book. Thank you so much.